I think we're going to get this panel started. Thanks everyone for your patience while we sorted out that quick mic snafu there. So thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Christina Stabe. I am the Global Finance Impact Lead with the Global CCS Institute, and I'm based in Houston, Texas, and so glad to be here today. So today we're going to discuss the status of CCS financing from a number of different perspectives. So we all know there's been an acceleration of activity post-IRA, as well as other enabling policies. But what we see is we need more private capital to come to the market to scale deployment. So we're going to talk with these guys about what's the status of CCS financing post-IRA and what kinds of projects are moving forward towards FID. So good afternoon, panelists. Thank you for joining me today. So I'm going to ask each panelist to please just really briefly introduce yourself, your organization, and then just a few sentences about where you fit into financing the CCS value chain, whether that is investing, providing debt, placing, arranging capital, seeking capital, et cetera, for CCS deployment. So Vimal, let me start with you.
Good afternoon, folks. Vimal Chauhan, I'm Managing Director, GE Vernova Financial Services. We're still getting used to say GE Vernova. We just spun off from GE about not quite a month and a half ago. I lead our power and development business for Americas. So that business, legacy power development, that's what we did for decades, and now that business has evolved to include carbon capture, which is what I know we want to talk about. And we, in terms of our involvement, we are involved in a number of CCS projects alongside our partners. And we are involved in the entire chain from development to project financing and looking at the investments. I've been with GE for 18 years now, so happy to be here.
Perfect. Hey, folks.
Yeah.
Thank you guys. Oh, sorry.
No worries.
Thank you guys for having me here. My name is Surid Mantravadi. I'm a partner at Greyrock Investment Partners. We're a Dallas-based private equity firm. I help lead our energy transition efforts, the majority of which is actually focused on carbon capture. What do? I back developers for a living, right? So what does that mean? I back management teams. We fund, G&A, so things like salaries, office space, rent, bonuses. But then we also build the projects themselves. We've got compressors on order. We buy tubular goods, things like this. Within CCS, we've got 2 developers we've backed. One of which I think is actually here, Vault 4401. Is heavily focused on kind of Midwest. We've got projects ongoing. CCS for us is a key focus. It's something we've been doing for a long time, and we're really excited to talk about it. Thank you.
I'm Matt Cattell, and it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation, Christina and GCCSI. It's always a great event. I am a director with the Sustainable Finance Group at Societe Generale, sometimes known as SocGen. We refer to ourselves as SG. We've got a bit of a 3-name and 1 organization problem. And that was after 15 years at the U.S. Department of Energy Loan Programs Office, who we'll hear from next. And so my focus at LPO was really on the carbon management space, and the last deliverable was helping get the CFIA program launched, and transitioned over to SocGen to help move private capital into the carbon management space. And shortly after getting there, I realized that private capital is moving into the wind, solar, battery storage space, not really the carbon management space. So I'm still navigating that space, but we're a global bank, so it's interesting to compare our North American activities where there's really no major activities going on in CCS with our European activities, where our colleagues in London are leading the financial efforts for the Teesside project, and the Northern Endurance Pipeline sequestration in the North Sea, which is a close to $2 billion total ticket size, and it will include private bank capital. So it's an interesting bank to work in because we've got this geographic diversity and So I look forward to the conversation and see how we can keep on moving things forward.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Harry Warren with the U.S. DOE Loan Programs Office. Worked with Matt there a couple of years ago when I was first getting started. I've been there about 3 years, so a lot of what I learned from him, and if I'm wrong, you know who else to blame, for that. LPO provides debt financing to a very, very broad range of large energy projects that are aligned with the specific missions of our various enabling legislation behind our various loan programs. So we'll talk a little more about some of our different programs in a few minutes. But if you look on our website right now, you'll see that we're currently somewhere in our processing. We've got over 200 projects at some level of processing, moving from initial application towards closing, for an aggregate loan request of almost $300 billion. So tremendous loan authority across this span of programs. And again, thanks, Christina, for hearing from us on this panel.
Great. Well, today we've already heard a lot about 45Q. We've heard about other enabling policies, and we've heard about some challenges. So in the context of that landscape, I'd love to hear from you guys, what kinds of CCS projects and business models are you seeing move forward right now? And Harry, I'm going to come back to you first because the DOE Loan Programs Office has multiple funding streams in play. Mm-hmm. So if you could share with us what projects are coming to you as part of LPO's programs, mm-hmm. including the Energy Infrastructure Reinvestment Program, the Innovation Energy Program, and CFIA.
Right. Yeah, well, thanks, Christina. Yes, you mentioned those three programs. Again, I think it's not an exaggeration to say that at some level, the Loan Programs Office can support pretty much any type of carbon capture and sequestration project that would be in the room here today, at least fundamentally in terms of our ability to do that. Of course, when we offer loans, it's very project specific to make sure that it's a good loan, particular good project for us, but very, very broad authority across those different programs that Christina mentioned. I think the things that we're seeing, I think I would put them in terms of kinds of projects, maybe into two broad categories. I think of them as sort of the transportation and sequestration driven projects. Somebody's building a pipeline, somebody's building Class 6 wells, they're probably going to aggregate emitters, across a number of emitters to try to fill those sort of capacities that they're building. And I think in those types of projects, I call those, my kind of transportation-driven projects. Those pipelines, they could be long distance, they could be medium, they could even be kind of shorter distance pipelines to sequestration wells. I guess I'd say, often they're the projects that are focused on what we sometimes call the low-hanging fruit of carbon capture, the ethanol plants, the natural gas processing plants that have the high concentration emitter streams that are very easy to more or less, as you know, compress and put into these pipelines. They can often be financed by 45Q tax credits, can pretty much carry the burden of financing those projects. So that's kind of one class of projects. And then the other things that we see, I think of them as the emitter-driven projects, right? Often a very large single emitter that's looking to do carbon capture. Could be a power plant, could be a new blue hydrogen facility or blue ammonia facility or some other process like that. They're going to build a very big project. Maybe they have a short distance pipeline to a dedicated Class 6 well. So it's sort of that kind of project. I think tend to see those two types of things coming through. The financing of those single emitter projects is not only based on the carbon capture side, but often when you, as a lender, when you look at the financing, the product value is important. We were just hearing about various credits that one might get, CDR credits or whatnot. Those projects often depend on that sort of full package of economic attributes to really get off the ground. So that's kind of a different financial situation for us. And the last thing I'll say is, so those are the types of projects. In terms of timing, because of the kind of office we are, we see things at like 2 points in time. We encourage people to talk to us very early in your project development so that you know what we can do, how we work, what are some of the things you're going to have to know to do business with us potentially. On the other hand, as a lender, we're not really ready to get into due diligence on a project until it's pretty well developed. So we often have a long period of time that we're talking to people from the early times when they're considering their projects and want to know what we might be able to do for them, to then dial forward to later on when they really are ready for their projects to move forward, and we can do our thing as a lender, which, you know, it tends to be later in the capital development.
Thanks, Harry. Matt?
I would say, you know, it's across the spectrum in terms of everything from working with corporate clients who have equipment to sell to carbon capture companies to help them navigate the marketplace and find ways to attach their sale of carbon capture equipment to the benefit of carbon credits and tax credits that may be associated with that project. And then it spreads across into the upstream capture project company itself. We also are more comfortable looking at high concentration emission streams, so your cost of capture is lower. We generally have a more comfort with projects that are, let's say, new build, where the carbon capture is an integral part of the overall system. And ideally, there's another product that's going to be sold that we can kind of wrap our heads around, like whether it be electricity or hydrogen or ammonia. So a good example is the Teesside project in the UK, which will be a new build combined cycle gas plant with carbon capture built into the plant from the onset. And then we're also looking somewhat at the midstream carbon transport and downstream sequestration. And the Northern Endurance element of the UK project is an example of that, where we're raising capital to finance the midstream and downstream portion. There's already equity lined up. It's a combination of oil majors who are going to step up to the plate with equity, and we're going to the market for commercial bank debt. And which will be interesting is that this is commercial bank debt for that portion that really won't benefit from government subsidies. The upstream portion of the project that's associated with the Teesside project benefits from a contract for differences, and we've heard contract for differences brought up a few times. So again, we're looking for ways that the cash flows are material enough that we can get comfortable from a bank perspective that we're not just relying on, you know, a limited cash flow from like a 45Q that makes us nervous. We'd like to diversify the cash flow to some extent. And then we also advise across the spectrum as well, projects that are coming in looking for government financing from, say, the LPO or government grant programs. So it's a pretty broad range of activities that we're looking at, and I guess one other thing I would add are like some small micro scale projects where the ticket size is smaller. The solution is at a smaller facility level. It's not $1 billion, it's maybe $100 million, and there are some interesting solutions and technology providers that we're talking with, and that's more of an equity solution, but we can help bring these early developers to introduce them to equity providers as well. And on the equity front, I guess it'd be a good time to maybe transition over to Grey Rock.
Well, no, I was going
Or
to
GE.
Vimal, and then who's going to go last? Thank you. Vimal.
With respect to the IRA and 45Q, my focus is on power generation, natural gas combined cycle, working on CCS or decarbonizing that power. Everyone knows that was going to be the most challenging part or challenging source of CO2 to decarbonize. And the reason for that is that the combined cycle, the flue gas have the lowest, or one of the lowest, concentration of CO2, 3 to 4%, compared to ethanol or gas processing, where you have almost pure stream of CO2, 98, 99%. So, 45Q, stepping up to $85 was great. A little bit of a blunt instrument because it was same for every ton of CO2, no matter what the source. So that, got a lot of activities started, and those projects are still making their way through development. The challenge is that the inflation in the intervening years have eaten away a lot of the gains that you expected from stepping up 45Q from whatever it was, $50 to $85. So that remains a challenge, and is going to be a challenge, especially for low concentration sources of CO2 like power generation. With respect to capital, there is no shortage of capital that is available for projects that are ready to be financed. Question is that this is a long development cycle business. It takes a very long time to develop the projects, and as the industry goes, we are still very early. It's been only a couple of years, and sitting here as a developer, you would think like this guy really thinks in terms of a very long cycle, but that's how it is. That capital wants to come in the later stages of the project, when the project is just like the loan program office. They want to come in when the project is almost ready to be financed. But getting there is a long journey. And the capital is there. We see transition funds being announced and hitting their targets all the time. And all of this capital would love to finance a fully baked, ready to go energy transition project like in natural gas combined cycle plus CCS. So, so you're working through this, through the cycle. Net Zero Teesside is going to be on GE technology, GE Vernova, once again. GE Vernova technology. So we're very pleased with that. We have been involved in that project for a long time. And hopefully that project hits the financial close. End of the year is aspirational perhaps, but soon thereafter. So that might be something that sets the standard, but different regulatory regime, not something that we see in Americas.
Thanks, Vimal. And I wanted to give the investor the last word on it because you've got a number of things that you're pursuing in the market, and you've found a space, and I just wanted you to share a little bit more about that with us.
Sure. So so just for context, right? So one, we're primarily U.S. and Canada. We will look at other places, hopefully eventually, but right now we're really very U.S. focused, but also a little bit of Canada. Two, we actually made our first investment before the IRA happened. So we've been here for a while. We believe deeply in carbon capture. We thought it worked at 50. It certainly works at 85. However, going back to kind of the comments Vimal made, what are we focused on? We're focused, or kind of what Harry said, we're focused on near site sequestration, near pure sources of CO2. Why is that? Well, whether you're moving it 1,000 miles or you're injecting it underneath the plant, it's going to be $85 a metric ton. And it's, y'all may realize this, it's really hard to build pipelines. And so we focus on developing projects as close to our emitter as possible. We tend to do single site emitters, kind of going back to what Harry said. Why pure CO2? Right now, in the stage of the industry we're in, we want to prove out that our developers can do this. People have been injecting CO2 in the ground in the oil and gas business for a long time. So our perception is, let's go implement that. We're a private equity firm. We're not a venture firm, right? We're not here to take tech risk. And so we're out here and actually prove out that we can do this. And I think our other big learning, other than, hey, focus on those two really, also because I'm a consultant and have to have three, is team, right? It's really important you have the right team. Why is that? You don't go asking for a Class 6 permit because you think it won't leak. You go there because you know it won't, right? You have to have really strong subsurface skill sets within your team so you're confident that this is going to work out. Second, you have to have really good kind of land people. You need to be able to go out there and get the pore space. And you need to be a member of the community and convince folks that this is a good project for you. All of that takes time, but it also just takes a really, really good team.
Great, thank you. So I think what we've heard is the IRA has provided economic incentives and business models for a subset of projects, but challenges to deployment remain. And so right now, we see large balance sheet companies out there moving projects forward and funding projects right now, but we really want to see a shift to bring more private capital to the space. So what should proponents be focused on resolving to support scale deployment going forward? And Sarit, if I could come back to you first on that.
Sure. It won't surprise folks that the first thing is permit timelines. As I've said, we fund developers, and so whether they take some a year to get a permit or 4 years or what have you, we fund it, which basically means the cost of capital just goes up. We have to get more resources to the EPA to get these permits out faster, because that, I think, more than anything else, one of our team members always says, nothing kills a deal like time, nothing kills a project like time. And so having faster permitting is by far the most important. After that, I think the thing we find most helpful is, again, we're not a venture firm, but we know after the pure sources like ethanol are sort of all injecting, you're going to have to expand. And so we really want to see more support. I think there's plenty on the VC side, but we want to go, if we wanted to say go implement these projects, we need support from folks who can help us backstop that risk. It could be the DOE, it could be utilities. I think that for us to do natural gas combined cycle, someone like that has to step up to the table, right? Because we can handle the injection, and we think we're going to have a team that's doing it shortly. Now it's going to come down to, okay, how do you do the capture to give us pure CO2? I think the third part for us really comes down to the risk transfer market. What do I mean by this? Tax equity, right? You need tax equity for these projects to work. You need tax insurance for these projects to work. And we as folks like that enter, what's going to happen is the perceived risk of these projects comes down, and cheaper capital than private equity will enter.
Thank you. Harry, what about from your perspective?
Yeah, I guess my first notes were going to kind of almost follow Sarid's, pretty closely there. I think on these pipeline projects, you have this situation where you've got these development timelines, whether it's for the pipeline, it's the Class 6 wells, it's the pore space, these development timelines. Once you get to the other side of that, you have a project that fundamentally has pretty solid looking economics to it if you're going for these, easy to capture or, high concentration sources. So it's really getting across that timeline and that valley for permitting, that's the challenge. I think when you get into some of the other single emitter projects, at least that we see, which are outside of maybe those sort of real high concentration projects, then for us, you have some of those same challenges. Maybe you have a single sink and a short pipeline, so that's a little easier. But then you add on all of the dimensions of, I'll call offtake, right? You're going to need revenues from the product. You're going to need revenues from various types of credits, whether people are thinking they're going to do things in the LCFS markets or CDR markets, whatever it is. Then I guess as an underwriter, those things come back to the debt side as a new set of complications that we have to look at, which is, how well are all of those financial elements going to come together, at least from our standpoint, to support a debt transaction, right? So there's a little maybe, and then you also, from the technical side, you also have to say, well, is the carbon capture technology there as well? And even though there are some well-proven ones, there's a lot of evolution there. So good news is the footprint kind of gets a little smaller in some respects on the downstream side, but on the upstream side, you have some more complexity. So it's kind of a different set of challenges, I think, for us on that side.
Thanks, Vimal. What do you think?
So I talked about the challenges, and in terms of CO2, the next item on that thinking is that a GE 7H turbine is the single largest source of CO2 point source in running at, close to base load. It's 1.5 million tons. So if we can find a revenue model that works and makes this happen, you don't have to put together, smaller sources, 50,000, 100,000 tons, you have a very large source right here. The challenge is the revenue model. So, 45Q, very certainly a key part of the revenue model, but by itself not sufficient. You need to have some other way to supplement, complement this model by either a compliance mechanism, which, as you noticed, Michigan just passed law, is still out there in terms of compliance, or some other voluntary mechanism by which either through corporate goals in terms of net zero or some other means that there is a premium or there is a what you can earn in addition to or what you can get in terms of purely incentive-based mechanism. So that, models are going to take time to develop, time to evolve, and this is a time-consuming process that takes place. But that's what really, in terms of all the other things, are all true. Permitting is too long. We have seen that the interstate pipelines are not that easy to develop. They have run into all kinds of issues, so EPA's last count was 150 Class 6 permits, taking 3 to 4 years. So more primacy to the states to make the process faster. All of those things have kind of enabling features, but ultimately what would enable carbon capture, especially at large scale, is the revenue model. And that evolution, I cannot sit here and predict and tell you what that model is going to be, but there are a lot of different models being talked about, a lot of people are working on. We ourselves are working on a number of different, evaluating, reviewing, but we'll need to see where it goes.
Okay. Matt, do you want to share your perspectives on what needs to shift to bring you to the table more and what challenges we should be focused on resolving from your standpoint?
Well, I think all the challenges that were just brought up are reasons that, putting my banker hat on, which I have to wear these days, I'm no longer a government LPO supporter where I can look at these projects at an early stage and invest a lot of time helping the developer overcome these challenges. From a banker's perspective, we're not really going to look at these deals because of all of these challenges that come up. Like we like cookies, our risk committees like cookies, our credit committees like cookies, and CCS is not a cookie. It is something different. And so when you show up at the risk committee and they're like, what are you spending my time like educating me on? Because that's really what it comes down to, is like from a banker's perspective, you have to diligence all of these contracts for the first time. You've never seen this kind of EPC. You've never seen these kinds of risks. You have to figure out like how they're addressed, and you got to model it, you got to stress it. And you have to, just from your underwriting perspective, have to work through all those things. And then you need to educate your risk team, and they're going to push back, and you got to put all that time and effort into that. And then you have to like convince your committee that they should approve it. And so that adds two things. It adds time, and it adds risk of execution. And from a bank's perspective, you are going to choose the opportunities with the least time and the least risk of execution. You want to generate revenue for the bank. So that's why wind, solar, and battery storage are the deals that the banks will look at. Now, from SocGen's perspective, like we're having the benefit of a great learning opportunity with Teesside and Northern Endurance. So that gives me hope that from within our bank, we're going to see that success. And although it's in the UK, it's not in the US, we'll be able to learn the lessons there and hopefully convince our US risk team and credit committee that, look, the bank from a corporate level could do it there. We can do it here as well. So let's roll up our sleeves and get it done. But I think a key difference between the US and UK is that the US has an abundance of wind, solar, and battery storage deals, and the UK not so many. So they've got some resources there that they can devote to this. But nevertheless, that gives me encouragement. I think like we're getting closer, and so time will tell. Hopefully, when we're here next year, I'll be like, yeah, we're working on 4 deals in the US now.
Do you want to add to that, Harry?
Sorry, if I could just say one comment.
Go ahead, sir, yes.
Really quickly, fundamentally on the equity side, what is our, for the pure emission streams, it's pretty straightforward, right? We know the CapEx, we know the revenue model, it's 45Q. Our issue we run into on the lower purity emissions is twofold. The CapEx is unknown and the revenue model is unknown, right? It's hard when you're taking equity risks, you can go have conversations saying, I don't know this, when everything is uncertain, it's really, really difficult, which is why we try to find ways to at least fix one of those, either by working with folks like the DOE or utilities or what have you, and then try to figure out the second piece. Right now, both are unknown. That's what makes it hard.
Thank you for that build.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe just one follow-on to Matt. I do think hearing from Matt from that private banker perspective, that is exactly why the Loan Programs Office is here, right? I mean, we were founded in 2005, so we've been around for almost 2 decades, but that's why we're here, is to be able, from a debt perspective, to try to lean in on some of these new projects. Our early slides when I first joined the office were the bridge to bankability, right? We're there to try to get some of those first projects proven out at a cost of capital that allows them to work so that they can be handed over to the private sector, who doesn't quite maybe have that mission drive that we do, because we have programs that have missions that we're there to fulfill. And I think also, we probably pride ourselves as the Department of Energy on being able to lean in on technology pretty well, right? We have an incredible depth of expertise to be able to try to sort through the various applications. We're not going to fund every deal, but to be able to look at those with a lot of the technical depth that the private market may not just be ready to bring to those evaluations, quite yet. And just one other slightly different point to make, because we kind of made it but didn't make it, and that is a big issue for financing in general is development capital, right? I mean, it is that money that gets you from an idea to FID to a loan to financial closing. That's the hardest money in the world to find. That's where it's great to hear that people like Sareed, kind of leaning in on that. That's probably something that holds things up more than the availability of permanent capital at the back end. If you've got a project that's ready to, put a shovel in the ground, go to FID, go to closing, that capital seems more available than the money that you need to get there, which is not insignificant, right? Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned development capital, Harry, because that was something we talked about a little bit in our pre-call. With a challenge like that, we see that financing approaches are going to need to broaden or evolve, right? And going forward to help get over those kinds of barriers. So I'd love to hear from you guys if you want to speculate on how will financing need to broaden or evolve, or how will deployment look over the next few years as we, try to move projects forward through the landscape of these different enabling incentives and challenges. So, Sareed, do you want to kick us off?
I'll be quick. I think we just got to do it. I think when we actually go inject CO2 in the ground and prove that it is there and it is there permanently and that we're getting a check from the IRS, I think a lot more capital enters, right? We just got to do it. And so that's kind of what we're pushing forward, is to go execute on those, the smaller scale projects, because my perception is we're building the infrastructure business of the future. It's just the markets haven't realized it yet. So let's go build it, do it, and once we prove it out, then I think, banks and infrastructure lenders and a lot of public market players enter. But till then, we just gotta go execute.
Matt, you had mentioned shifting away potentially from mega projects as an initial focus in a way to build expertise, capability, trust.
Yeah, I think that's one observation I have of the market is the projects that get announced are these massive, biggest in the world projects that are X billion dollars, and that's exciting and good, but those are really hard projects to build. And then you track the progress. You're like, oh, that's behind schedule. It got canceled. See, another example, it doesn't work. Whereas like as I mentioned in my opening comments, like I see some smaller solutions that are micro scale that can cost $100 million, $200 million, and are more easily deployable. So like that's one way of to the point of like we just got to get this done and get like points on the board and show that this works. And that's an approach that could potentially work where you are less in the spotlight and you can get things done just methodically and build up that momentum. So that's one approach. The other approach is when you look at the equity investor side of things. I think some of the most successful projects to date that have been invested in are supported by large strategics. And like the examples that come to mind are the Oxy 1.5s, the Exxons and the Lindes, and these are some big ticket projects, but they're big ticket projects that big balance sheets have stood up and supported. And I think I see a trend at this stage where the equity stack seems like it needs to be filled more with strategic equity than financial equity, because again, like getting back to the comments about cash flows and like we have to know how the money flows through the system. Financial investors are going to be hesitant. Again, they're going to be looking for the low-hanging fruit, the easy to do deals, the solar, wind, battery storage. Whereas strategics have a strategic reason to take some risk. They can sell their technology to these projects. So I think that's another solution that I see to move things forward is a greater participation as investors in these projects by the strategic players.
What about Power for CCS?
So I talked a lot about Power for CCS, and with respect to development capital, I'm a developer. I can use a lot of development capital. So, but at the same time, being in this business, it teaches you discipline, how much exposure you want to take at what stage of the project. If the project is moving along and meeting its milestone, the exposure is very, very closely correlated with that. So yes, the development capital is scarce. It's very hard to find, and you have to pretty much fight for every dollar. But there is a reason for this, because it's all risk capital, 100% risk capital.
Zero.
So it could be easily zero, and any developer, as long as I've been in this business, knows that very well. So a lot of scars to prove that. Yes, the development capital is always going to be a challenge, but it's available for the right projects. And with respect to scale, it cuts both ways. There are benefits to scale. When you're doing something like this, you do it on a too small of a scale, economics will become that much harder to do. And power generation naturally doesn't lend itself to doing something small. I mean, you're not going to put a CCS on a 5 megawatt turbine. It just wouldn't make sense. So the scale and power generation is the most capital intensive business. And CCS, by all account, I'm not putting any marker here, will easily double the cost of the project. So just take this as an illustration, not a data point, but it's very capital intensive. The good thing is that combined cycle is very well proven. We've been doing that for decades now, and so that technology is proven. No issue with your risk committee. If we bring in a combined cycle, that's going to get through. CCS in itself, carbon capture, is proven technology. Yeah. The carbon capture has been around for 50 years. Its concentration may be different, but the technology itself is not new technology, amine technology especially. The application is the point here. The application at this scale is the challenge. So it's not a technology challenge, it's the application. And we have been focused at GE Vernova, we have been very focused on understanding the integration of how a carbon capture could work, which is carbon capture is a chemical process, and you're putting it together with the mechanical process of power generation. So those two things have to be very carefully thought through how they would integrate and how they would operate in practice. So all of those things, make it challenging, but it's not a technology challenge.
No, I appreciate all that. And I think, Carrie, before I go to you, one thing that we had talked about was, obviously we talked a lot about these challenges in our pre-meetings, but you made the great point about how DOE is investing in other things in parallel, the DAC hubs, the hydrogen hubs, to help get enabling infrastructure in place. Can you elaborate a little bit on that and how you think that'll help move scale forward?
Yeah, thanks for that question, because I do think that's true. Sometimes I get very LPO myopic in terms of what the projects are that are out there and thinking about in the next few years, what are we hoping is going to come online. And I think, I hope that there will be some of these pipeline-based, Class 6 well-based projects can get across the finish line, get through their permitting. We'll see what scale projects they are, maybe to Sareed's point, there'll be some of the more compact ones. And then some of these point source deals that are out there, there are some big projects that certainly want to get built. But yes, we at LPO, our sister organizations, OSED, the Office of Clean Energy Demonstration, they're the ones you read a lot of press releases about over the last year, right? They announced their winners for 4 big power project demonstrations, right? The Minn Kota coal plant, right? A couple of some combined heat and power plants. So those things may be winners. You read the $6 billion that were awarded to a whole bunch of different sorts of carbon capture projects and emissions reductions projects in the commercial space. Some of those may come forward. So I think as we look across that, I don't know, I guess I feel pretty hopeful that we're going to see a set of those, I'm not sure which ones, are going to make it across the finish line. One little just other point to make, since you mentioned, Vimal, a minute ago, Class 6 well permits. And when I joined the office almost 3 years ago now, we were kind of facing this future where there were very few Class 6 well permits that had even been filed. And so we're sitting there as a lender saying, well, we're not going to be able to lend money until these things are permitted, and we're looking, sometime down the road. Well, just looking at EPA's site this morning, now, of course, EPA's list has gotten smaller, especially when Louisiana came in with primacy and took a lot of that workload off of EPA. But they have 30 projects that are supposed to reach permission to construct this year or in 2025. So all of a sudden, that's become a 6 to 18 month window to get those Class 6 permits to construct. So I think I think the industry has dialed forward a couple of years on that parameter in terms of being ready. Now there are still other permits and things to be done, but I'm hopeful that will create a lot more, I don't know, buzz is the right word, that together with Wyoming and together with North Dakota and Louisiana, that we'll see a lot of those opportunities now ready.
Harry, and you mentioned permitting, so I'm going to take the moderator's license, just ask you quickly, because we talked about that, how NEPA is something that comes up a lot when people are talking about accessing federal funds, because as we know, NEPA is required for some federally funded action. So can you just provide some guidance or advice on implications around the permitting timeframes with NEPA and how you like to see that overlain with the LPO's process?
Yeah, thanks. Definitely, our loans are major federal actions, I guess, under my sort of a layman's legal understanding of how this works. And so we have to do a review of any loan we make under the National Environmental Policy Act, which is actually, 1985 or something. It's a very old act. Under that, there are a couple of levels of review that we may be called upon to do depending on the complexity and scope of the project. But that's one of the reasons why it's really good to come to us early for a conversation about what our process looks like, because you need to build the timeline in for us being able to perform that NEPA review into your broader permitting kind of timeline. It can sometimes be very challenging. The top level of review is called an environmental impact statement. And for really long pipelines, transmission infrastructure, it's sort of, my environmental staff tells me that's the level we're going to need to do. It's an 18 to 24 month process. So obviously you have to have that built into your thinking early on as to when are you going to perform all the groundwork for that so that we can get started on that and hopefully get that aligned with, you know, your FID decisions and your need to begin construction. Not to say that they all require that level of review. Probably if you look over time, most of our reviews are environmental assessments, which is kind of a somewhat shorter time frame, a little easier to fit into underwriting schedules, right? But yeah, good question. That's good reason to talk to us early and make sure that we've got some agreement that we have some timelines that can work together for us. By the way, I think same thing if you're going to get funding from any other part of DOE. I mean, the NEPA requirements are across any other grant program that any other office would offer.
Well, I'm going to open it up for audience questions in just a second, but as a final question, I just wanted to ask my panelists, because we've talked a lot about 45Q and economic business models, and I just wanted to know if any of them wanted to comment on the potential current or future reliance on price premiums for low carbon products or voluntary carbon credits, and how that might be coming into your space as you're looking at potentially financing projects and moving them forward. Any thoughts?
I'm happy to go first on that
Sure.
one. I think, and again, speaking to the cash flow question, like where do the cash flows come from on these deals? And I think and as we heard on the previous panel, like the tons of carbon that are captured are an environmental attribute that should be saleable in the market as an environmental credit if you've got the proper monitoring, reporting, verification, and tracking systems. And so that's something that at SocGen, in the environmental compliance team that I'm a part of, we advise our corporate clients on how pathways to meet their net zero targets or decarbonization pathways. And one of those solutions is always carbon credits, because they realize that they can't do it all on their own because the cost just becomes prohibitive. And then what you see in the market is nature-based credits on the one side, which is kind of a low cost, lower quality in terms of monitoring, reporting, verification, and my personal view. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have the high quality, high cost direct air capture credits that are coming to market. And I think you've got this huge potential market in the middle of the industrial tons, that if there could be a way to convert those into cash flows to enable these CCS projects to get built. So that's one remark I would provide.
Anyone else want to comment?
Sure, very, very quickly. I think I would kind of segment that into two pieces. There's the regulatory markets like LCFS. LCFS is out there. There's projects that are trying to use it. It's plausible, and particularly for kind of the ethanol projects, right? Then you've got the voluntary credit markets. We haven't found folks who are willing to step up and say, hey, we'd like to buy carbon credits, because at the end of the day, you can see the CO2. Here is a seismic plume showing you where the CO2 went. Here's, the government has sent us a check. So while we would love to see those, we haven't seen it yet. We're not taking that in our underwriting just yet.
Okay, Harry or okay, no worries. Great. Any questions from the audience? We have just a couple of minutes left, so maybe one or two questions.
Hello, thank you so much for the great panel discussion, very informative. My name is Erica Rios, I'm coming from Canada, Alberta Innovates. I have a question for all of you. So one of the great opportunities that we have to merge two worlds that Matt was just mentioning, bioenergy and engineered solutions, it's BECCS. So bioenergy and biomass-based fuels with carbon capture and storage. What have you seen in this space? What kind of challenges have you faced in order to make these projects economic and move to FID?
I'll take a quick look. I mean, from our standpoint, I think BECS projects, certainly I guess my sense of there's a little geographic overlay issue right now, maybe with the carbon capture side of BECS, right? Are you producing that material at some place where you're going to have convenient access to the carbon sequestration and storage? I always sort of imagine in my mind that if you're building pipelines and wells that are going to service the ethanol industry, you're at least probably in the right maybe geography for where BECS might work at some point in the future. And I think they also bring in some of those other point source like questions that we've been talking about. You got to look at the fuels market. What's the fuel going to be worth? What are the credits going to be worth, from those projects? So you have to solve both the capture side and you've got to serve the product value side if you want to achieve some low cost capital, to support those. I mean, is that probably a truism?
Yeah, I mean, for us, it's kind of, I hate to give you the same answers before, but it's the same two things, right? It's CapEx and revenue, right? So what is the CapEx? What is technology you're using? How much is it going to cost you, right? Has it been used before in terms of technology? And the revenue side, what are you doing? Is there a voluntary market? Are you selling carbon black? Are you selling, what revenue streams do you have? And more importantly, can I find bankable offtake to where SocGen will give me a loan for it? Because it's generally very expensive projects. I do not. We have not made any BECS investments, no.
Other questions?
Yeah, Angela Seligman with Clean Air Task Force. My question is for Harry. Thinking about the CFIA loans or loans for building out CO2 pipelines, you had mentioned, and I think a lot of us have seen, the difficulty with getting these large pipelines built out, especially across the Midwest. But that has also been grouped with a lot of developers not wanting to have to go through that NEPA process, and so they haven't always considered some of the CFIA loans. I know we've just seen the announcement for the grants, but I'm curious if you have any suggestions beyond your initial one of companies reaching out early so that you can start that NEPA process early to, in some ways, kind of shrink the extra time that it might incorporate. But do you have any suggestions for how developers can kind of use the NEPA process to make their pipeline projects more likely to be successful?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I have to say, honestly, I feel like it's one of those walls we've just been beating our heads against, and you just feel like you just keep hitting the same brick wall where, as you pointed out very eloquently there, you take a project that has so much permitting and so concern across, a number of jurisdictions maybe and different agencies, and then you try to layer on one more long-term. And often the pipeline guys are just, look, we just don't even want to think about it, no less integrated into our timeline. So it is a requirement and it is there, and you do have to figure out how to deal with it. I think maybe I like the point that you made at the end, because I have had a couple of discussions over time. They haven't really borne fruit, but this notion that if you do engage with us and you do go through a NEPA process, you are going through a very disciplined public environmental review by the Department of Energy in coordination with other federal agencies of everything about this project. Might that be advantageous to your overall, community engagement and social, kind of process? So I'm hoping there may be some people who see the beauty in that argument you were alluding to, because I think it could be there, for us. And these projects take longer to permit than people think they're going to anyway. So maybe we're not the long pole, in that tent. But I think that's a great, kind of potential point. And I'm working every day to find somebody who's going to hit that sweet spot of, yes, the NEPA review fits in well with my thinking. Yeah. Hey, if I make one more just question, when Jared put up his slide initially, there were all these little green and blue dots for carbon transportation projects that were going to happen. If you are a little green or blue dot who has not talked to me yet, would you please call me? Because I think I know some of those dots, but I'm not sure I know that many dots. So please come forward and let's talk.
I think we're going to take one more question before we send everyone off to break.
Yeah, Chris Gregg, Princeton University. My question is for all of you, I think. To what extent is the time-limited nature of the IRA a problem? So set aside the quantum. Let's imagine it was $125 a tonne and you could get a natural gas plant away. But at the end of 12 years, you've got a revenue cliff. And so how does the banker and the equity investor look at that, right? To me, it's unlike wind and solar, which is capital-intensive operating light. You retire the capital in time, you can probably survive. Carbon capture's got operating.
Yeah, I'll take this first, and that's the revenue model, right? And here you have a very capital-intensive project that you need to get return on and return off in 12 years. The problem is bigger than that. So you can perhaps get 125, and let's just stipulate that that number works. Issue is what happens after 12 years. Are you going to be shutting down the carbon capture? Or will you be allowed to shut down the carbon capture at that point? And if you're not, who's going to pay for it? Because it's not like carbon capture, there's a CapEx element to this, which is significant, but there is an OpEx element to it. It takes a lot of cost to energy, steam and water and power, and the amine cost to run the carbon capture. And once you have the CO2 on the other end, you have to take it somewhere. That's costly too. And so the problem is, the 12 years doesn't really solve that issue.
That's what I said to you. The question is,
You run a variety of cases, right? What you do is you come down and you say, okay, you know what, I'm going to look at, one of those cases is actually I'm shutting everything down and actually selling everything, or there's a negative CapEx at the end, if you will, or positive CapEx, however you want to think of it. So you run everything, you got to be comfortable with all those scenarios. To your point, that limits the number of projects you can do, because lots of projects, if you just assume 12 years, aren't profitable enough for us.
Well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap us up. Okay, great. I know we're heading into a break, but please join me in thanking my panelists for their wonderful insights.